total between the ages of 14 and 26 years of age are at risk for not graduating high school or have already disconnected from education and the workforce. For the past 8 months, 12 municipal leaders who represent rural, suburban towns, and cities have worked collaboratively to listen and learn from those around the state who work with young people with the goal of building coalitions to develop and sustain service coordination. We listened to youth, teachers, police officers, social service providers, elected officials, commissioners, parents, and employers to learn what barriers exist that are stopping young people from getting what they need to be successful. As we develop strategies to establish and increase service capacities in schools, nonprofits, and the public institution to cut this crisis in half by getting 60,000 young people back on track over the next 10 years. This report provides a playbook for each municipality to take from it what they can to improve the lives of young people. This plan outlines a path forward to improve the lives of citizens in the state of Connecticut. Our work is nonpartisan. We all equally share the responsibility for building bright futures for those across our Connecticut communities if we have the courage and give equal opportunities for our young people to achieve their greatest potential. It's my honor to introduce my friend, colleague, Mayor Eleanor Carbone from the City of Torrington, who is a co-chairperson of the 119K Commission.
Thank you, Laura. It is really, truly an honor to be here to this point where we can present the findings and strategies that have been developed out of the work that we've undertaken over the past 10 months. As I was listening to our young people speak outside of this room, 2 or 3 comments that really resonated with me. It is critical that we get this right. Out of the mouths of babes, it's critical that we get this right. And that was the approach that we took to listen to the success stories, the failures, where systems can be shored up, where systems need to be revamped, or where collaboration would really change the trajectory of our young people in their lives. The listen and learn sessions did provide a spotlight of 6 areas of concern or gaps that deserve focused attention that will provide a springboard to develop action items that would introduce preventative, recuperative, and early intervention strategies that'll strengthen policy, strengthen systems, and encourage collaboration. When I was first asked to be a part of this commission and to co-chair the commission, the one thing that I wanted to make clear was that I did not want this to result in any finger pointing at one system or one department or one agency. I wanted to make sure that we were all inclusive. I think what you'll find through this report is that we've touched on everything. We heard from the stakeholders. We took their stories, we took their lessons learned, and then we did the really hard work, trying to develop a strategy that we can put into action items, that we can then build individual strategies, individual action items that will guarantee some success. What do we also know as municipal leaders? The best laid plans can sometimes run off the track. We also know that we have to be malleable enough to pivot, put in the efforts, put in the groundwork, evaluate where we're going, and if any changes or adjustments need to be made, be willing to acknowledge that and prepared to do so. So the first thing, as I said, I wanted to say is the goal. What is the goal? You have 119,000 young people that are in various stages of disconnection, moderately disconnected to severely disconnected. If we have a modest goal of reducing that by 50% over a 10-year period of time, that's substantial, that's significant. Not only does that change the lives of the young people that are 14 to 26 years old right now. 10 years from now, they'll be 24 to 36 years old. That has a big impact on our economy. It has a big impact on future business leaders, on future educators, on future policymakers. So achievable. We wanted to make sure that we were developing strategies that we knew could be achievable, and that the various agencies and entities could buy into. They want to be a part of this. So the preventative actions to prevent on-track young people from becoming at risk, recuperative actions to get at-risk students back on track and reconnect them, and then the early interventions. This would be the strategies to reconnect disconnected young people and to get at-risk students back on track within 1 year of the initial disconnection. One of the other comments that I heard from one of our young speakers was that disconnection knows no boundaries. We heard from one young man who experienced incarceration and had to rebuild a life. And we hear from one young person whose family experienced a medical emergency that changed everything for that family. So through all of our listening sessions, we also know disconnection knows no boundaries, no socioeconomic boundaries, no racial boundaries. So all of that had to be considered as we were listening and developing these strategies. What we boiled down to in all of these stories and the lessons we were learning is that there were 6 profound gaps being faced by young people that emerged as items that we could probably really dig into a little bit and focus on those. The first one being a lack of engagement or belonging and empowerment. I think that you probably heard that from our young speakers today. Engagement and belonging in a society where social media has become the norm. They don't know a time where those devices, those phones weren't at their fingertips. In one of our listening sessions, we heard young people say, when asked the question, where do you go for advice? Where do you go? They identified Google as a reliable source of information over a trusted adult. That's concerning for us. Having those connections in the community are critical. The second item that we identified and wanted to focus on were insufficient educational resources and infrastructure. Learning to navigate, you're in your elementary years, you're going first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. But when you get to the high school and there are options before you, could it be a technical school? Is it an alternative education? Are there other magnet schools that are available to you? Understanding what those resources are and how to access those resources is difficult for a young person who doesn't have an adult that's leading them through this. Likewise, making that transition from a high school education to a workforce development program, college, community college, those are opportunities that we know that need to be strengthened. Our third area of focus: insufficient workforce development opportunities. Engaging the CBIA, our technical education, our DECD commissioners was really critical, because what do we know when we're hearing, as municipal leaders, we're hearing from our businesses in our communities. Where's the workforce? Where are the young people? They're not coming. They're not applying for these jobs, these entry-level jobs, which are perfect for somebody who's just getting out of high school, maybe working to get a little money available to be able to pay for their college education. Those connections aren't there. And then once we get our young people in these jobs, helping to develop that skill set and helping them to understand what are the expectations in the workforce environment. So an area that we have identified that is a gap that can be focused on. The fourth area: fragmented, underfunded patchwork system of services. Again, I'm reflecting on some of the words of wisdom that we heard outside of this meeting. If you're stuck in a place where you need advice, you need access to food, housing, mental health care, medical care, knowing where to go and how to access those resources is critical. Growing up 50, 60 years ago, you relied on an adult to connect you to those. Now, with our demographic changing, so much stress on our young people, making access to those resources available to them directly is an area that we know we can be better at. Our fifth area or fifth gap, a lack of data transparency and usability. So many of the organizations that came and testified before the commission submitted testimony on our webpage, through social media, contacting the commissioners directly. They feel that they've been working in silos for so long that they don't even know where to get that reliable data themselves. So breaking down those silos, developing those data systems that would be available to everybody in real time is an area we know that we can certainly make improvements on. And the sixth area or gap was the lack of accountability across various stakeholders. When we put this together and we said lack of accountability, quite frequently, at least in my experience, it isn't, a purposeful lack of accountability. It's we're doing God's work here and we are doing it well, yet there's nobody to report that upstream to. Or we're doing really good work here and there's somebody across town that's doing similar work and there's no cross-pollination of the information that we're gathering. So when we talk about that accountability, we want to develop a system where if funding is connected to a program that is being developed or monitored, we want to make sure that that information is very publicly gathered, very publicly shared, and that will inform how we can improve on any of those areas. So after we developed these 6 areas, these gap areas we've been calling them, then the real work started. That is where we then had to drill down, and we were really relying on those experts in their field, the Boston Consulting Group, Dalio Education, Domus Kids, one of my co-chairs. Those are where these experts came in and said, here are some areas and some suggestions. So on this page, you'll see we then broke these gap areas into 4 strategic pillars. Strategic pillar number 1, conditions, and how would policy and funding support any initiatives that we can bring to bear to improve the conditions. The coordination, obviously, as I said, if everybody is working very hard and having success stories in silos, it isn't going to solve the problem. It's creating little pockets of success, coordination, collaboration is really how we're going to scale any of those successes. Our third strategic pillar is capacity. How do we build capacity within the organizations and agencies that are already doing this work? Whether it's on a small scale, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's out of the kindness of their heart, how do we scale and build capacity for all of that? And then the fourth pillar being coalitions, getting us to do to really line up for collective impact, all of the resources that can now work collaboratively to change these outcomes in such a short period of time. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over. The commissioners that have done all this work spent hundreds of hours poring over testimony, have all been selected to talk a little bit about what these action items are going to be. So at this point, I am going to turn this over to Mayor Arampalam, who will talk a little bit about the first pillar.
Thank you, Mayor Carbone. Thank you to all of my fellow commission members. I'm sorry I'm late. It was the traffic getting over here. The commute is killer. I'm sure all the fellow mayors understand. Yeah, I'm talking about coordination today, and look, I think this is really important because this isn't the first attempt to deal with opportunity youth in this city, in our cities, or in our state, and oftentimes where those efforts fall short is on coordination. I am a new mayor, as many of you know, and was part of a group of mayors that did a cohort at Harvard, and they went through these case studies, and one was actually about the city of Hartford in the early 90s, and it was a youth opportunity grant called YO, which is a very 90s name. I thought it was pretty cool. All these mayors from around the country were learning about the city of Hartford. Apparently, this had been taught within their business school for decades. And I learned that it was a story about lack of coordination. Hartford was the example that Harvard Business School teaches of lack of collaboration, coordination, and how that impacts youth service. I mean, it's very important to the work we're doing, and some folks like Hector Rivera, who's in this room, were part of helping turn that around. What's clear to me when we bring together folks working in workforce development in my city, when we work to bring together people working in youth engagement in my city, and this is probably true of all of these mayors, we pull together these tables where people say we do the same work and we don't really talk to each other. I've never met the person across the table from me. And it's one thing to pull together the table of people who are running these organizations. And we do with Opportunity Youth in Hartford through the Hartford Opportunity Youth Collaborative, which brings together all of our youth service providers. But when it's the heads of those programs talking to each other, that's collaboration, coordination from a programmatic level. If we think about hubs and spokes, if we think about building a system that really reaches every single one of our kids and ensures that not a single child falls through the cracks, we should start with the children. We should start with the young folks. We should start by looking at a strong data backbone for supporting those young people and coordinating services from the standpoint of the young person who is experiencing those services. And without that, we are going to make independent investments in independent programs that look good on a slide deck or a piece of paper, but never really know what impact it has on each and every one of our young people. And so, look, as we look to make a real investment in young folks in this state and understand and acknowledge as a group the importance of that to our success as a state, to our vitality as a state, to our growth as a state, we should put young people forward first in that conversation. And that requires really intense coordination from the standpoint of the young people in our community. And so that's, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to talk about the conditions.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning. It's wonderful to be in a packed room here in Hartford, Connecticut. I want to direct my comments to residents of Connecticut because that's who this report is written for. They are the intended audience. Because to really realize the vision of young people first, it requires everyone, every resident in this state, in every corner of this state, working together to do something a bit more than we are doing today to help address this crisis, to help ensure that all young folks in this state thrive. Second, I want to speak to the accountability mechanisms that are proposed as part of this strategy. This strategy is strong on different ways to strengthen accountability within our systems. As I spend a few minutes on examples of how this strategy proposes to strengthen accountability, please take my comments in the context of the whole. In other words, this is a bold, honest plan that is comprehensive, that has a whole set of holistic, integrated ways to address this crisis. Accountability is one of many ways that is part of this approach. 4 specific examples, and there are more, but I have 2 minutes, of how this plan helps to strengthen system accountability. First, we've heard from countless residents across this state about how hard it is today to understand where is the money going, what are the investments being made in, what is resulting from those investments, what are we learning from those investments, how are we improving at every level of our system in this state. One way in which this strategy proposes to strengthen accountability is by bringing transparency to the funds within our systems. Every school board, Every municipality, every state agency ought to have a dashboard available, easily accessible for every resident to see where are the investments being made, what results are being achieved from them. Bringing transparency to our resourcing will help to strengthen accountability over those who are within systems. Second, a theme across this strategy is to really reflect on what is working and what is not. If things aren't working as intended, we ought to stop. We ought to consider ways to improve and adjust. 2 examples of several in this strategy. 1, the strategy calls for reimagining the alliance districts. In 2012 is when the alliance districts were created. We wish now to continue maintaining funding for the 36 alliance districts. But my goodness, we've had more than a decade of experience of this alliance district approach. We ought together, as Connecticut, reflect on what has worked and what hasn't, and reimagine what we ought to do moving forward as it relates to the alliance district structure. Relatedly, the Commissioners Network. The Commissioners Network is the way that Connecticut helps to, or at least in theory helps to, lead school turnaround efforts. This program, too, we call for phasing out. We call for phasing out because the results have not been as transformative as we all had hoped. And we need to phase it out because ultimately resources are not limitless. We need to make choices over where resources are invested, and we choose to phase out the alliance districts over time so that we can stand up and meaningfully invest in community school models. There is a strong evidence base for community school models. We believe deeply that community school models, if implemented with fidelity and if prioritized over time, could really be effective in meeting the needs of young people across this state. Third, and relatedly, we also ought to look at our next generation accountability system, the ways in which we hold schools and districts accountable. Here, too, we have learned a lot through practice. Thankfully, there's already a working group beyond this commission that is focused on this accountability system. There's also a working group focused on graduation standards. What are ways in which we can raise standards? What are ways in which we can ensure that our graduation standards are actually meeting the needs of young people, are responsive to their agency, their desires, their passions, their progression toward career? And it's not all about strengthening accountability over public school systems. This, again, is comprehensive. So to give another example, beyond schools, we look at within communities. How are we all working together, to the mayor's point? We look at creating in each community, if it doesn't exist, we look at creating a local hub to lead integrated care models. If it already exists, we encourage continue. And please raise awareness around your work so that others can understand what this looks like. We look at ways to strengthen accountability at a regional level by creating youth success oversight boards. Youth success oversight boards would be a new addition, a necessary addition, because we look at the needs of young people, especially when they move between and across schools and communities. They become in some ways most invisible to our hyperlocal systems. We need stronger community and responsibility over our regional youth success oversight boards. Related to that, and the last point, is it's also about how we work together and how we leverage funds to incentivize coordination and collaboration, not incentivize how we compete with each other. And so we also intend to create essentially a network by which from local communities, starting with the needs of young people and their families, building from there through the regional approach to the state level, a network in which if you wish to work together as a practitioner, you're in the network, you are eligible for funding. If you don't want to work collaboratively and in coordination with others, that's fine. But as envisioned by this plan, you wouldn't be in the network. You wouldn't be eligible for the funding. It's time in Connecticut that we work together. It's time that we all do our piece as residents across this state to lean in a bit more than we are today, to stand up a bit taller than we do today, to do our part to address this crisis. With that, I want to hand to Mayor Elicker and just emphasize that part of this strengthening accountability comes with increasing resourcing for the work that happens. And Mayor Elicker will speak to that.
Thanks, Andrew. First of all, I want to start by, obviously the commissioners did a lot of work, but many of the people in this room did a huge amount of work contributing to this report. and whether it is people that are representing organizations, whether it's people that came to testify, whether it's people that participate in the roundtables. And so we're really grateful to you all for the work that you did as well. Mayor Horty talked about CCM being nonpartisan. I would say this report is bipartisan, and that's something that we should be very proud of, because in today's pretty divisive world, for people on both sides of the aisle to come together with such a strong recommendation for what we need to be doing as a state for our youth is something that I think we should be proud of, and is an example of other ways that we could collaborate in the future. I've been tasked with talking about in a little bit more detail the recommendations in the report regarding funding. And there's, I think, some quite obvious reasons why this is important, in particular school funding. Oftentimes with disconnected youth, school may be the only place where they feel safe. School may be the only place where they're around mentors that deeply care about them. School may be the only place for multilingual learners where they're exposed to English, to be able to learn English, to be able to succeed in our community. School may be the only place where they have access to mental health support, to a social worker, to a guidance counselor. And our current system does not even have close to enough support to help our young people, particularly young people that are disconnected. And an important part of the 119K Commission is recommending an increase in funding to our schools. We often talk about the educational cost sharing formula, ECS, and getting that to fully funding, which is close, but the reality is fully funding ECS is not fully funding our schools. And the major part of this report is recommendations on how to transform that ECS funding to really reach those goals. I want to underscore the need, and I'll talk about staffing. Social workers. In New Haven, we have 53 social workers for almost 19,000 students. That's a caseload of 358 students per social worker. And we are not alone. In Bridgeport, they have 47 social workers for almost 19,600 students. That's a caseload of 417 students per social worker. Danbury, 25 social workers for 12,000 students. That's a caseload of 485 students per social worker. Waterbury has a caseload of 512 students per social worker. It is clear that one social worker couldn't possibly even come close to providing the services for that number of students. School counselors. New Haven, we have 46 school counselors for 19,000 students, a caseload of 408 students per counselor. Torrington, 8 school counselors for almost 4,000 students, a caseload of 493 per school counselor. New Britain, 22 school counselors, 9,900 students. That's a caseload of 450 students. In New Haven, we have 26 librarians in 41 schools. I mean, think about that. And, I think we all came from different backgrounds, but most people came from an environment where their school had a librarian. And we're not even hitting that number in New Haven. And the similar trends among other staffing levels. I think you can see the picture and understand the need here. We need to be investing more in our public schools and not less, and particularly at a time when we have more and more students that are struggling with mental health challenges. We have more multilingual students in our schools than ever before. In New Haven, we have 75% of our students are low income and 23.9% are multilingual learners. Almost a quarter of our students are multilingual learners. The ESSER funds were a lifesaver. And I want to underscore that we are very, very grateful to our state legislators and the governor for putting in significant amount of funding into our school, but those funds were not permanent. And we are all experiencing a huge cliff with the drying up of those funds. And we saw it all in the headlines. Hartford was facing 300 positions to potentially lay off, Enfield 130 positions, Wallingford 16 positions, Stratford 19, Danbury dozens. In New Haven, we have a significant deficit as well. Stanford 25 positions, and the list goes on. Many municipalities are putting more and more of our residents' taxpayer funds into our public schools. In New Haven alone, we've increased our educational funding for our portion by 48% in the last 5 years. The recommendation from the commission is to update the ECS formula to address these needs. to increase the per student foundation number, which hasn't been updated for years, even for inflation, to increase the poverty and multilingual weights, and to add a component for special education so there can be a more shared burden between the state and our municipalities to support our young people with special needs. Now is a huge time of opportunity. We're having a statewide conversation about disconnected youth, and we need to think big about how we are going to change this trajectory. We have a bipartisan support of proposal from an organization that represents all 169 municipalities across the state. We're very optimistic and hope the governor and the legislature will seize this opportunity and support our young people. And now I'm very grateful to hand the mic over to First Selectman Frieda.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. So I'm here to talk about a very important initiative that we saw early on in all of our meetings all across the state, and that is the importance of workforce development and how critical it can be in the personal life development of many people. I'd like to start by presenting each and every one of you a visual. Whether you're an adult, a young adult, or a young person looking for help. Consider you're trying to solve a problem. And consider you've got a phone number to call that you think can help you solve the problem. And what you find is that number can't help you. You get referred to someone else. You're getting bounced around. And at some point in time, you're going to become frustrated. And that is exactly what we saw in talking to the youth all across the state of Connecticut. Frustration. Frustration leads to complacency. Frustration leads to a lack of hope. And we heard that time and time again. Because there's so much fragmentation, the phrase vertical silos was mentioned earlier in this meeting. We've come up with solutions that we think can help reduce the frustration and create hope. In the case of workforce development, there are a couple of initiatives that this commission is moving forward with, and I'd like to share with you two of them. One is the importance of workforce boards. Many people may not know that there's 5 workforce boards all across the state of Connecticut. Mayor Elliker and I happen to sit on the board of directors for the Greater New Haven Workforce Alliance. These are wonderful repositories for young people to go to, ages 14 to 22, to help simplify the fragmentation of trying to find a job, eliminate the frustration, and create hope. So one of the programs that the workforce boards have is a youth employment program, starting at a very young age, 14, 15. A lot of people don't know about that. The acronym for it is YEP, Y-E-P. These youth employment opportunities are such that a parent can take a child in for summer employment to at least get started in understanding what it's like to get involved with a career. Statistics have shown that over the course of time, the earlier that we can get our youth employed has a sustainable factor that will last over a lifetime. And that is very important. So the youth employment programs are one part of it. These workforce boards also have great resources to help in transitional careers. If in the event somebody is frustrated in their own career and they see it as a dead end, these workforce boards have resources to identify which sectors perhaps that individual may be best suited for. Which sectors are sectors that are rising sectors in terms of employment opportunities. We learned a lot on this commission. In New London about a month and a half ago, we heard testimony. Chris from CBIA was an outstanding presenter in terms of the number of jobs that are out there and how employers are looking for people to hire. We also heard from Yale New Haven Hospital. I think it was 97,000 jobs are available that people may not know about. And they're not necessarily jobs that require a college education. So the workforce boards are one major part of this. And consider the YEP, the youth employment programs at a young age, and consider the transitional career opportunities that the workforce boards can help with. And secondly, the importance of apprenticeships. I'm going to tell you a quick story I told in New London. There was an individual whose life was shattered. He ended up to be incarcerated. He had no hope. He had no desire. He felt that his life was a debacle. He was able to get an intern position, and I'll name the company because I asked the company to come speak in New London. Veolia Water, a worldwide waste management company. He gets the internship. He then is hired as a regular employee. Several years later, he becomes an executive with Veolia. If it wasn't for that internship, ladies and gentlemen, his life would have remained potentially in a shambles. So the importance of internships we see is very critical. I'm on a personal, implacable mission to find companies that offer internships. And in North Haven, I've got 3 already that are very interested in helping create internships in 3 different sectors. So I'll conclude by saying this. Imagine complexity. Imagine how difficult it is to try to get a solution in certain situations, particularly getting a job. What this commission has done is identify solutions to reduce complexity and create positive outcomes. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Lipke. I'm First Selectman in the town of Canterbury, and I'm going to start by saying it's awfully tough to follow Mike because he brings a lot of passion to this, and he's actually been probably one of my biggest advocates for what I'm going to talk to you about today on this board and commission, and I think I'm going to make sure his voice is heard more often in the future. I represent a rural town, Canterbury, 5,000 residents in eastern Connecticut, Windham County. And if I can leave you with any thought, an idea today from being here, it's that this issue of disconnected youth goes beyond the urban environment. It goes beyond the suburban environment. It impacts the rural environment. In fact, my region, Windham County, is proportionately the most heavily impacted in the state of Connecticut. This is an issue that crosses all borders, all barriers, and hits all of us squarely, regardless of where we live, from Bridgeport to Sterling. It goes across this state, and it impacts every resident, all our young people. We in rural Connecticut face some difficulties which are unique to us. We have small towns. Canterbury's 5,000 residents. We have towns in my region that are 1,200 residents down to 800. We do not have the social services. We do not have the housing authorities. We do not have the robustness of those services to serve the needs of our residents. We rely solely upon the nonprofit sector, which is underfunded and really stressed to the max that it can serve our communities. So for us, building coalitions, getting that support from Hartford, getting these organizations to work together with one goal, to achieve one goal, to help serve our disconnected youth, is paramount and going to be key. I mean, Mike, in one of our forums, I had mentioned that we rely solely on these nonprofits. So he's taken upon himself, I think, to be an advocate and a voice for us, and I appreciate that, because we do have these needs. We have these, but we don't have the capacity to satisfy them. So it's going to be very important that we work together, that we build these coalitions, and that the urban areas, they have their needs, but we also understand that the rural communities have theirs as well, and that our needs are unique and cannot be overlooked and must be addressed to this process. I'll finish by saying it's been an honor to serve on this commission, and I'd like to thank everyone who has testified throughout the process. And I think this is one of those issues, as I've said repeatedly, it's very important that we understand that we cannot allow 20% of our 16 to 24-year-olds to fall through the crack. We need to address this. This is about the future of our state. It's about the future of our children. I'm past being a disconnected youth. Yeah, been there, done that. I might be a disconnected senior soon, but for us, we really need to work to give these kids the future that they need, the future that they deserve, and it's an incumbent upon us to have that, to have a society where we serve those needs, and we cannot let this go unaddressed any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to run through how this strategy can help prevent an on-track student from becoming at risk. I'm going to tell you about a young lady named Megan. Megan is a 9th grader who just moved to a new district. She has to walk 30 minutes to school to the school bus and has started missing morning classes. She is also learning English as a second language. Megan is then connected with the Learner Engagement and Attendance Program, which we call LEAP. The staff visits Megan's house. They talk to Megan and her family about safe transportation, other resources that they probably didn't know about. Megan starts a new school. She receives educational performance information and previous educator notes from her old school and identifies areas where Megan needs additional learning support. Megan then enrolls in classes with teachers teaching English to speakers of other languages, which is also called TESOL. She'll actually be with an educator from the TESOL and is assigned to a success coach who checks in on her and helps her apply for extracurricular programs that she is eligible for. Megan is then connected to a recreational hub served by a bus from her school, where she takes art lessons with peers and makes friends outside of school. Over the summer, she participates in summer apprenticeships in biosciences. Megan then signs up for dual enrollment classes with a plan to study biosciences at the local community college after graduation. She has a strong support network at and outside of school. So at home and outside of school now, she has a strong support network. Now, again, that is for someone who is on track. We want to prevent them from going at risk. Now I'm going to break down, I'm going to talk about a young man named Tyler. Now, with this strategy, this can help someone like Tyler, who's a disconnected youth, a disconnected young person, become re-engaged. Tyler is 17 and he is homeless, moving frequently between shelters and friends' homes. He left high school after multiple suspensions and has not found steady work. He was recently arrested for possessing illegal substances, so likely Tyler probably ended up in juvenile detention. If he didn't get connected to this next. The Juvenile Review Board then directs Tyler to nonprofits offering diversionary programs that provide him with treatment for substance use and disorder and community service opportunities. Tyler's local Youth Success Oversight Board designated integrated case management hub works with the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness to find Tyler stable housing. So that's important. And I know we have some members here today that I'm a strong advocate of this, but you'll find out in a minute if you haven't heard it before. Tyler participates in a transitional employment program where he receives training, wages, and a credential. His employer connects him with the GED Works program, and he completes his GED while working part-time. A Youth Success Oversight Board designated hub organization continuously checks in with Tyler on his needs, including his mental health support, his housing options, and his permanent employment. Tyler finds a job with a nonprofit serving opportunity youth that pays his rent and living expenses. He receives mental health support and feels connected to his community. So I'm telling you, I told you about Megan, and I'm telling you about Tyler now. Tyler at 17, with this plan that we have, we're talking about 10 years, right? So we want Tyler at 17 to stay connected. We want him to stay in housing. We want him to have these supports. This is what this plan supports. So when I'm talking about Tyler, and I didn't know who had drew this up, but I'm glad that they did. Tyler is me. At the age of 17, I was also homeless. If you haven't heard this before, I was in a home with a single mother. We didn't have a father. He died very young. My parents had a 30-year age gap. So that goes to tell you something. That also being said, I was kicked out of the schools. I ended up in juvenile detention myself. There was a lot of things that I guess I'd just say I fell through the cracks. But I had a consistent support team, whether I was going to juvenile detention, whether I had to find another place, whether I had to get some food, whether I needed someone to talk to. I could tell you 10 years of where Tyler was at 27, I owned a home by then. I had worked about 7 years in retail banking at the time. I still had people to go to. And I don't want to be biased, but yes, I do work for this organization now today. So for over 20 years, they've been connected with me. And still to today, I'm working with them. I told my current boss, you got to sit in here while I talk, because I still get a little nervous. I still got to call them. So that being said, I really want everyone to understand that this is where these young people can be. But if you really go by this plan, we don't have to worry about people like Tyler, because it is kind of sad that and now I'm saying 15 years ago, I was going through 14 years of homelessness. Why are young people still going through that now? It sucks, and I want to make sure I'm going to use the right words, because I know we're on TV, but it really does, and it's painful that it shouldn't even still be happening. We haven't found an alternative for young people to stay in school. What has been the thing? Just kick them out? We have to find out why they're being truant. Maybe they don't have nowhere to go. So I know I had 2 minutes, so I'm gonna move along before I go too deep into it. But please, 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 please. I don't want people like Tyler and Megan sitting in front of us. This is Connecticut. We can make it happen, but it don't have to be that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lane McBride. I'm with the Boston Consulting Group, and I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues over here and myself, it's been an honor to partner with the 119K Commission and these committed commissioners and committed folks in Connecticut who've shown up and engaged, from young people and all the other members of the community who have been involved over the past 7 months. I think if we've heard anything in the last couple of hours, it's that we hear from young people that there needs to be a serious plan. And we hear from this commission that we have a serious plan. And this is a starting point. Mayor Carbone talked about there will be unexpected events. Andrew talked about we're going to have an improvement mindset, and there are going to be some things in here that aren't going to work. And they need to be improved over time. And that's why it's important to have a coalition that stands the test of time on this issue. One other ingredient that's needed as we take that next step in the journey is we need to talk about what this is going to cost, and we need to talk about how it's going to be paid for. So I'm going to talk about what it costs, and Joe's going to talk about how it's going to be paid for. So for those of you who can see the screen, or if you look in your report, it's on page 84, there's some estimates of cost. There are 2 different ways that we've estimated cost in this plan. The first applies to all of the aligned actions except for the ECS formula. You can see that in the blue bars. And so here, what we've done is we've looked at using existing costs in Connecticut, and where there isn't an existing program in Connecticut, we've looked elsewhere. We've looked at what it will take to scale up the programs and initiatives that are recommended in this plan. And this would be, for example, so that the youth employment that we heard about from Marissa, we heard about from First Selectman Frida, that all of those thousands of young people who are on a waiting list aren't on a waiting list anymore. That has a cost. So we've done that. We've added that up for those 21 aligned actions, and that adds up to about an incremental $400 million per year, as well as $150 million in startup one-time costs. That's not a specific year. That's once all of this is happening. And so it may take 3-4 years for all of these different aligned actions to be implemented, but that's our estimate of what it would cost to do all of these things at once. In addition, there's an estimate of the incremental investment needed in the ECS formula. And I think Mayor Elicker has already made the case for why that's needed, You can see in those bullet points on the slide, the components of the recommendation are to adjust for inflation, to add weights for those who have disabilities, and to increase existing weights for things like students who live in an area of concentrated poverty. So we have a couple more pages just to provide a little bit of context around that number, 545 million incremental investment in the ECS formula. And so first of all, is this. It is true that Connecticut has increased its investment from the state in K-12 education through the ECS formula. That's the blue bars on this page, and you can see it's just under $3 billion on the left, and it's up to about 3.4 on the right. It is also true that has not kept up with inflation. And in fact, if we look at how much a dollar buys in 2024, and we take that backwards to 2017, we're behind by about 400 million. And while there has been some decline in enrollment, that's also true on a per student basis. Connecticut is funding about $400 less per student in state funds today versus when you go back to fiscal year 2017. So that's one piece of context. Another piece of context that builds on that, maybe if we just go to the next page here. So we like math. My team, we've looked at a lot of different scenarios. So this page lays out the current ECS formula. That's the top line on this page, and then some different ways to change it. Why don't we keep going? Let's keep going one more. If the only thing that we did to this formula was to adjust for inflation, and we had started that back in 2013, there would be an incremental $800 million in investment today. And so when we talk about an increase in 550 or so, it's just about keeping up. And it's not even quite doing that versus if we had been increasing just by the amount of inflation, the foundation funding per student since 2013. So that's just a number to put that in a bit of context. So the recommendation you can see here comes out below that somewhere in the middle. So now I'll hand it over to Joe to talk about how to pay for it.
I was kind of hoping Lane was just going to offer to write a check. So a couple of things that I want to cover here that I think are exceptionally important to this plan for people to understand. The first one is if you look on this slide and you look all the way to the far right, instead of reading it from left to right, we start from the far right. This is something that every commissioner on this commission was in strong agreement about. And this is the cost of staying the course. This is the cost of doing nothing different than what we're doing now, or the cost of inaction. That cost of inaction is further growing in disconnection. We know the state is on a trend with declining graduation rates. It's a loss of about $5.5 billion in GDP growth. It has increased cost or further increased cost in things like incarceration, while it is also at the same time lost opportunity in terms of new tax revenue from people being engaged in the workforce. So the cost of inaction is very high. Also, as Lane pointed out, and I think it's very important that we understand this, is that while the ECS formula has not kept up with inflation, that does not mean that those costs are not being absorbed somewhere else. Where they're going proportionately is into the property tax. So this last column, the cost of inaction, is the only column that guarantees tax increases. They're property tax increases, but inaction is the only column that guarantees tax increases. So what are the paths forward that don't guarantee tax increases? Well, the first column talks about reinvesting the fiscal impact of this strategy. Incrementally, it doesn't happen all overnight. Incrementally, we know that there are new revenues created and new savings created through the success of this plan. So what it contemplates is to also incrementally reinvest those savings by making payments, whether it be through social impact bonding, where you actually do the bonding to pay for the plan, and then you use the success of the plan to pay for those bonds, or in the areas of workforce doing things that look very much like a tax increment financing type of model, which is really the same thing. It's recapturing the success. It's recapturing the economic growth and using that recapturing of the economic growth to pay for the plan. Now, that can't all be done going into the 2025 session and do it all at once. This report does not contemplate or anticipate doing that, but it can be done through making strides. It can, as Josh has talked about several times, and you heard from Mayor Frieda, it can be done by putting young people into the workforce very quickly, very quick points up on the board in doing that in terms of recapturing that revenue and recapturing that savings and using it to pay for the investment that's being made. The next column is this column of reallocation. And you heard Andrew talk about a lot of things in this report speak to reallocation. So as you do things like funding or phasing out the commissioners network that we know is not working, there is revenue within that that can be recaptured. As you build out the nonprofit services network, you are going to have people who choose, frankly, on their own to say that they don't want to be a part of that network. And as Andrew mentioned, that's fine. That's a fine choice for people to make. I started a service provider net and I don't want to work and play with others. I just want to do what I do. Well, that's fine, but you shouldn't be doing it on taxpayer dollars. If you want to go it alone, go it alone. So we can reinvest taxpayer dollars into those that are part of a broader and greater movement. And then within this reallocation of spending, I believe it was in 2021, the state of Connecticut itself actually commissioned a report that identified potential savings and efficiencies. That report outlined somewhere between 600 million and 900 million in savings by implementing all of the things that were in that report. That's not our report. That's the report that the state had actually commissioned for itself. That would be very difficult, a lot of those things to do, and certainly a lot of those, again, incrementally would take time. But there are probably things within that report that could be recaptured now to get this moving. The last bucket is the new or expanded revenue sources. Now, in this bucket, it does contemplate an option for tax increases, but it does not require them. It contemplates it as a stable revenue stream that is an option. But it also contemplates doing things like providing tax breaks to large philanthropic giving to help pay for this. There are several large philanthropic organizations that could be compelled, who have interest in this area and frankly could be compelled to help fund and support some of these aligned actions if there was some greater benefit to them to do so. There's a lot in here about working with our federal legislators and our federal delegation to bring home the funding that the state has been promised for years through things like IDEA. We are significantly behind where we should be in terms of those federal dollars. They have increased. At one point, the full funding increased from about 6% to 11% of what it was supposed to be. That's a far cry from the 100% that it was supposed to be that was promised. So there are areas there that we think we can really work and recapture. And the last part of it is certainly finding ways to better capture state surplus dollars to help support this. This organization that I'm blessed to be a part of, we are very supportive of fiscal controls. We're very supportive of making sure our towns and cities live through budget cycle after budget cycle of what's going to be cut, what's going to be cut, what's going to be cut. And unstable finances are a bad thing. But also when it comes to education and to our future, frankly, the cost of not doing it right far exceed any benefits of putting an artificial ceiling on that spending and the state continuing to over time reduce its proportional share of education spending. So, we think within those three categories, certainly the recapturing of the savings, the reinvesting of the savings and the reinvesting of the new revenues created by putting people at work, and then creating some flexibility in looking at the surpluses that are contained currently within the state of Connecticut, that this plan could be funded and probably fully funded over the next 3 or 4 years. The other thing I would like to do before we conclude and open it up, we do have a few commissioners here that you haven't heard from. They were kind enough to yield the remainder of their time, so to speak. But I want to introduce, from the far left, coming to Mayor Ben Florsheim, Mayor Danielle Cheeseborough, and Mayor Mike Passero. Were all incredibly engaged as members of the 119K Commission as well. And so at this point in time, I think that concludes our synopsis and presentation, and we'll be happy to open up to members of the media and your questions. And I think Donna Hamsey here is going to be kind of playing referee. And
so if members of the media that are here could come to the microphones at the circle, that would be helpful, just so that we can get the audio.
Jessica Harkey with the Connecticut Mirror. Obviously, there has to be upfront cost when we're talking about this, and there's already a lot of resistance about school funding. There's a lot of players arguing we need more in early childhood, we need more in K through 12. What are you guys hearing from state lawmakers about putting funding into this next year and the upcoming years? What are their reactions to this?
Well, we have done obviously briefings already with state policymakers, again, on both sides of the aisle. And we've presented them with these ideas of how to do this without actually raising taxes and the different funding formulas for doing it. What I would say, and I'm actually pleased to say this, I'm not going to tell you that they're all like, yeah, give us this plan and we're going to implement it now. But also, all of them from both sides of the aisle from the very beginning of this have been very collaborative in understanding that this is a Connecticut problem and a Connecticut issue. So I'm pleased to say, at least at this point, nobody has put their hand up and said, go away, or this is too much, or I'm not interested. I think that there's a learning process in these weeks and months ahead where we're going to learn from them and they're going to learn from us, and we'll see how we can get this to evolve. But I think that to directly answer your question, Jessica, there has been sort of an open door to have that dialogue with everybody that we have discussed this with at this point.
Hi, Amelia Adi from CT Examiner. One thing that came up multiple times in those forums that I didn't see discussed as much in this report is the issue of the public transit system, particularly in the rural areas of Connecticut. Do you have proposals on how to address that issue?
One of the difficult decisions the commission had to make is about which topics to cover. And I think we could say two things that relate to that. One, there are other issues that go beyond the scope of this report that are critically important. I will say, though, that transit did come up and was an important part of the engagement of the commission. We did hear this from young people, and it is part of what's addressed here.
Oh, there we go. Dan Horst, CT Insider. I wanted to have you talk a little bit more about redirecting funds from programs that not necessarily aren't working, but aren't part of this network that you envision. And specifically, I get that you're not naming programs, but in the sort of spirit of Josh Brown's Tyler and what was the woman's name?
Megan and Tyler.
Megan and Tyler. Like, what does it look like? What is a program that is good-hearted and has succeeded for some people, but needs to have some of its money redirected toward this network look like in that, in that scenario?
Dan, I'll begin with that just because I've been somewhat involved in this area of the report, but I'll certainly defer to our commissioners, who in many ways have much more expertise in this than I do. I think what we're talking about there and what it looks like is when we talk about a hub and spoke model of a young person being at the center and all of their needs picture all of their needs being different spokes that come out from that. What a program looks like that's not giving the great value of return is one that may be, for lack of a better term, a very good spoke on an otherwise flat tire. And it's working in a vacuum to address a need, a specific need. But if it's not working in coordination, that young person is getting their other needs addressed, then ultimately the success of that one program that might be very good is not making meaningful change. And I think Josh could probably speak to that some too, but we see that in a lack of a coordinated network. We see a young person who, instead of having all of their needs met, they might have 4 or 5 different case managers. What they need is one case manager that's making sure that their whole suite of services is being met, not 4 or 5 case managers that's still leaving gaps. And so I think that is why, as part of the commission's recommendations, by the way, this came to us in our very first meeting back in New Haven. I think even people who were on the panel there from United Way and others brought this up about bringing people collaboratively together to meet the suite of needs that a young person has and funding that, but not funding things that were just on the margins going it alone, because collectively, even if they're doing good work, you're not getting good return. You know, just because I provide you housing, if you don't have a meal, you still have a problem. You know, there's all of these different things that have to be met. So I think that was really, starting back to the very first meeting, that was where that idea came from, of making sure that the program wasn't put at the center, that the young person was put at the center, and that the network was built out around them, and that the funding went to being targeted to those who are actively participating in that network.
So go ahead. I'm sorry. I want to. Sorry.
No, I wasn't going to say much, but one thing I was going to say to second kind of what Joe is saying, when I was talking about not being biased against the nonprofit that I work for, again, they've been involved with me now, Dan, as you know, over 20 years, right? So I can say this: my advocate, who was my advocate many years ago, was the reason why I got my driver's license, right?
Your boss.
Ultimately, he's my boss now, you know? So, you know, this is somebody who was actually in high school with me when I was telling him to get the hell out of my face half the time, or, you know, don't worry about where I'm going after school, Tom. Is the man that also got me get my driver's license, and then made sure that I got a job in the bank. And hey, if you fell out at the bank, you know, do you have a job here? Consistently staying with these young people, consistently engaging them. This is the type of programs that should be funded. You know, I don't want to say too much, but I'm a strong advocate of this. If it don't work, don't fund it. If it ain't been working, don't fund it. Fund things that work. If it's working, put the money behind it. If it's not working, sorry, leave it alone. Like Andrew said, if you don't want to be in the network, that's fine. Go do it. Handle it by yourself. But those that are in the network that's taking advantage of that those tax dollars, you know, this philanthropy help, those are the ones that it's working, like the Connecticut Opportunity Project. And I don't want to go into that because then they're going to think I'm trying to be biased and be on Dalio's side. But these are programs that work. You know, they work. You know, I'm sitting here because a program, a model, it worked. And it's still working today. So those are the programs that should be funded. So, you know, like I tell you again, Tyler was 17 when he was homeless. That was me at 17 was homeless. And that was the same guy I was kicking out of my, telling him to get the hell out of my face. And ultimately, a few months later, got my driver's license again. So fun things that work.
So in terms of money, out of the total cost of this, how much of it comes from existing programs that would either be retired or redirected, turned from hubs to spokes, or moved from one part of the wheel to another? How much money is that? And how hard is that? It's hard for you to describe even generically programs that don't work, let alone having somebody in front of you who's running one. Maybe somebody's sitting here who's running a program and you think that program's got to be retired. How do you envision that?
I don't think that comes first, Dan. I think that doing the things like the bonding to support parts of this program, get it up and running, get that network up and running, and then some things that are in the very first aligned action, which talk about data and accountability and how to measure success. As you build it, you put those measurements against it. And the areas that are succeeding, that the measurements that we just don't have the data inputs to do now. But you build that network outright, you build those accountability measures outright, and then as you need to grow this plan, you start to identify those areas where funding is working and delivering the necessary return, and other areas where funding is being placed that we're not seeing the level of return. So I think that is an incremental part of the process. It's not an out of the gates part of the process. And I'm going to look over to my friends here from BCG and their other staff to see if if they're in agreement with that methodology as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, we wouldn't be here without a level of transparency and the state having a functional P20 data system that enables us to know that there are 119,000 young people. I agree with Joe. This starts with aligned action number 1, which is creating greater transparency at all levels of the system. And that includes transparency around where money goes and around the outcomes associated with those investments.
What I would also add to that is just I think that the emphasis is more aptly placed on the requirement that these or the incentivization at least that these programs that are providing services be doing so in coordination and be working together and be reporting centrally and less so on the notion that programs are going to have to be shut down and be defunded. I think that is based, and Joe referenced that this came up in the first forum in New Haven from the United Way of Greater Connecticut, and the model that where a lot of us are looking to is the coordinated access networks around the state, and the effectiveness that that approach a number of years ago brought to housing services. And that was less about shutting down those programs that were ineffective in providing those services and more about making sure that they were working together and requiring them to be working together. And that's, again, the successes and struggles of that approach can help to inform this one. I will also say that when I think a lot of us can probably speak to this from our experiences during the pandemic, when not-for-profit agencies and service-providing agencies, municipalities included, were not forced by statute, but sort of forced by circumstance to work more closely together, a lot of benefit has been realized by that, and we still have partnerships in Middletown that emerged because of that. That I don't think would have existed if there hadn't been a coming around the table to try to confront a crisis. And so I think a lot of these service providers would benefit and would like, frankly, to have a network that is helping to provide accountability to the larger structure and to bring them in closer coordination with their partners around the state.
I'm Doug Hardy from CT News Junkie. It sounds a lot like you're putting together an insurance, a medical provider network. What does it look like to join that network? What are the requirements? What kind of practitioners are you talking about? How do you qualify these agencies?
Well, I think Doug, in those early aligned actions, it defines that as being built from the ground up, as opposed to the top down, because the different parts of our state have different needs, and it's different. And so, that idea of creating the regional hubs, the local hubs that then go into the regional structure, that then go into state structure, how that network is fully built is going to vary based off of the different corners of the state and what the needs are and where the inputs are coming from. It has to be a local process that transcends town lines. If you want to look to one community that just really stood out and does it very, very well, when we saw how Norwich handles case management, they have an incredibly robust local structure where they literally sit down every week and review the case of a young person at the center and make sure that all of those spokes are being met. And it's different compared to the person, and it's different organizations that are stepping in and meeting those needs. Ultimately, the challenge is that wonderful network that they do in Norwich ends at the city borders. And we look at models like that and we say, we can do this and we can take it beyond those borders. I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead, please.
I think that's a great question. So to Joe's point, I'll provide one example. And I'm sure if they're watching, they would not mind me mentioning this. The YMCA is an example. So during this process, each of us had different roles. We hosted individual town meetings, and each town has a different set of resources, contacts, and people we can rely on. So the YMCA is one of those organizations. So in my office, with Andrew and some others, we brought in 2 executive directors of the YMCAs. Even though the meeting was held in North Haven, they represented multiple cities and towns all across the state of Connecticut. They are one of the nonprofits that's highly funded, and they have all these different activities that youth can utilize, let's say after school. We see that as important because that reduces the complacency, that reduces the frustration. Getting these young children or these young people, ages 14 to 22, in programs that can enhance their lives by creating structure and activity. Now, the question was asked earlier about transportation. There's another answer to it also, that each of us on this commission, each mayor across the state of Connecticut has a large degree of contacts. So when I'll use myself as an example, I have some transportation issues right now, but we have relationships with these transit districts. And sometimes it's not easy to connect the dots, but through that, I'm hopeful that we can further build the infrastructure to have a viable bus route so those kids can have transportation. And through some of these nonprofits, like I just mentioned, the YMCA in particular, they come in play as a major resource to help franchise the disenfranchised kids that we see across Connecticut.
Just a little follow-up here. We've been talking about vertical silos and all these agencies and nonprofits. They do kind of work on their own. They all use different software. How are they going to be coordinated? Is every kid going to have a case manager who is at a specific agency, or is there going to be a separate group for case managers to work for? I mean, I just heard somebody talking about social workers have 300 clients, things like that. So how many people are we talking about, and how much legislation do you need passed to make sure all this information can pass from A to B to C to D, from public entities and to private ones?
I
Sorry,
can
it's a
speak to that
complicated
from
question.
a analytical implementation perspective. I think maybe you guys would be better to speak in terms of priorities. There are many strong local examples and pockets. And so, this is going to be a bit of my perspective that even goes beyond the words of the report by just a little bit. I think the way that you make progress on this is you find ways to scale those examples. You may then get to a point of maturity where you decide you want to create some more consistency and structure, but I think it would be a mistake to say it has to be a certain kind of organization in every community. So we're going to have one of whatever everywhere, and that's going to be the exact same structure. It's likely you're going to have a different structure for case management, for example, for students who are still connected to school versus students who aren't connected to school. And the organizations that have the capacity to get started right now to build on what they're already doing are going to be different in different parts of the state. And so I think you have to start with some pockets of excellence and look to grow those. And then over time, maybe you do think about a backbone system that everybody could use, but I don't think that's where you start.
So one of the things that we heard, and we heard it in Stamford and other cities and towns in which we visited, and I know Josh knows this very well, I learned a lot. And one of the things I learned in Stamford was the importance of family advocates. We heard this in multiple cities. When we have a situation where there's a school counselor that's handling 200 kids, that's not a viable solution. But the importance of the family advocate, we found, that's who they go to. So somewhere along the line, the proliferation of family advocates, I think, is part of the answer to your question. And Josh, you know that very well, right?
Yes, sir. And just second what Mayor Fried is saying, it's the family advocate, which means yes, you're addressing the youth, but you're addressing the whole family. So the whole family needs are being met. You know, this family advocate is going to the home. You know, this is the person that they're going to while they're in school, after school. This is their mentor. This is ways that they get to school. Sometimes we talk about transportation. This is someone who's picking them up. Again, you heard about my story, my family advocate. That's the reason why I got a driver's license. I was able to drive here today. You know, it's also my family advocate. My first apartment, it got furnished by my family advocate. So it's important. It's key. You know, I don't second what you're saying, but you know,
Can I just jump back to the legislative question? Is there legislation that needs to be passed? Are you guys listing that in terms of privacy and things like that? Is there anything that has to be changed in state statute for this all to cross-pollinate?
Yeah, I think you have to have various agencies at the table involved. And one of the things that would be required when you talk about creating the regional network to coordinate all of this, what really makes sense, because you're building it differently in each town and city, but you're building it from the bottom up, is part of this recommendation also contemplates that regional housing of it be done in a new branch umbrellaed under the COGS. Which would create, require some legislation, and that's part of the funding model too, to create those hubs within the COGS to be able to collect this. But the other thing, Doug, that I want to make clear too, it's not just about building the network, it's also about the inputs to the network. So if you look at that very first column on aligned actions 1, 2, and 3, part of that informs that network are our schools. And having the right systems within our schools that track the services that these kids are receiving, the services that young people need. So when they go from school to school, that's not lost. But that also informs the system, and the system informs the schools. And then on the other side, when you have this network built out and you have these spokes built out around a young person, you have to answer the question, the very vital question of how do I enter the network to begin with? What is my initial entry point? And there's a very strong recommendation in here. It's actually aligned action 3 that talks about taking a 211 system that was built in 1976 in partnership between United Way and the state, using that as a backbone, but modernizing it into a way that becomes an app that young people would use in their everyday lives. And by something that they would use in their everyday lives, I can't answer all the questions on how that would be, because young people need to be at the table when that app is being developed. We've heard from them, we'd like to have a feature in it that talks about what events are going on in the community this weekend. Some of them may want a feature that offers gaming, maybe something that offers some type of social chat rooms, but something that a young person would engage with that then within that app had the backbone of the 211 system. So I may use this every single day and never need a support service, but the moment that I need one, something that I use every day is in my hand. And then by accessing that support, that's a data entry point that helps inform the system. That helps take a person who was not in the network, who was not identified as a hub with the hub and spokes, and it moves them over to now be a part of that network and identifies them as somebody whose needs need to be met. So I think that there's a lot to that. There's only 3 aligned actions there, but there's a lot to them. And I don't think that in those you can just walk in and not work with state agencies. That's why it also contemplates creating like a hierarchy state agency, an Office of Youth Success, that helps coordinate all of this as well. But the idea is you have to have that information that goes across schools. So when a young person changes schools, educators know what their needs are. The social workers know what their needs are. You have to have a network that's built that closes those gaps. And you have to have an entry point into that network that is accessible to young people. And that entry point isn't just the social services. It may be workforce. It may be the other things that they have. So I think that is how those 3 aligned actions are intended to be built out.
So 2 things. Part of the report talks about awarding funding to school districts and towns that will share administrative positions or combine services. We have 18 or 19 regional school districts in the state already. Are you envisioning something different than that, or is this you're looking for more regional school districts?
Thank you for the question. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be regional districts. It could be shared services. So I'll just talk about Stratford. So we have a CAO and a COO in the school district. We have a human resource director in Stratford that also manages risk. There's a human resource director in the Stratford Public Schools. So it can fall under an umbrella and we can share those services, sharing that information. So that's one way of doing it. Also utilizing the shared services that we have through the COG. And I'll make a plug for CCM because we have shared services at CCM too.
As I've said a lot over the last 8 months of this commission process, Mayor Hordick is exactly right. Which is to your question, we're not looking to create more regional school districts. This is not about structures or boundaries or towns. It's about services. And ultimately, it's about resources because we all have limited resources. This commission process has looked comprehensively at every conceivable resource that we can imagine and find and think about how can we leverage it in service of young people. That includes, and it's smaller dollars relative to some of the other things we've been talking about, but it includes what we're currently paying for services around copy, for services around IT, in administrative positions. And it asks the question of if towns and districts wish to, they're not required to, but if they wish to find ways to combine services so that they can ultimately reduce cost on administrative overhead to then have more dollars available for the programs that we've been talking about, we would try to incentivize that through the creation of what we call a 21st Century Fund. That 21st Century Fund would have money in the fund, if approved, so that if districts and towns decide to do what we just described, they would not just have more money for what they've done, but they also would have more money coming to them to incentivize that. Is that helpful?
Yes. The other thing I wanted to ask, there's a point in the report that says that DCF youth are 2.3 times more likely to be disconnected. Were there conversations with DCF through this process, and is there funding in this report to assist DCF to address that?
So that one, it's a really good question. I would say there has been engagement, and we speak to the broad set of issues. I think it's fair, and my team or you guys can add or correct. There are some aspects of how government works within the agencies that are not within the scope of what this got into. It doesn't mean that they're not important. There certainly are issues that contribute to disconnection and are related to young people being at risk that are beyond what's covered here. Is that a fair way to put it, Joe?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is nothing in here that is a recommendation is an indictment on any good work that's being done or any of the agencies. We look at all of them as collaborative partners on this work going forward, certainly DCF being one of those. And not only do we look at them as collaborative partners, we also look at them as valuable inputs for us to continue to learn from as well.
Sorry, I think we have time for maybe one more question, but because we're coming up on time, but so I'll leave it there.
Donna, if we don't have another question, I know Josh Brown wanted to make some closing comments, if that's okay. Yeah.
Oh, well, I was just gonna first, I wanted to thank you for letting me actually be on this commission. I also wanted to thank all the mayors, Andrew, co-chair, Mayor Carbone. From the beginning, I had asked something, and I had said to them, like, listen, I'm good for being on this commission and doing this work, but y'all got to go to where the kids is at. Meet them where they're at, go where they are. We're going to really talk to the kids, and they have done that. I mean, they have come all across the state from Salisbury, Canterbury. I said Salisbury, sorry. Canterbury, Hartford, Torrington, New London, Stonington, Middletown. I can go on and on. Mayor Frieda, you've been at every one, but Mrs. Haldick, I always say your name wrong, but I really wanted to thank all of you. Mayor Elliker, You all have came together to make this work. I mean, whether it was us going to talk to children in the juvenile detention center or was talking to the kids that, you know, you will just say are at risk. I really appreciate the work that y'all have put behind this. Everybody, I appreciate the support, and I appreciate you really being behind one to connect these disconnected youth and re-engage those that are not engaged now. So, and Joe, obviously, BCG, you know, but I just wanted to shout this whole team out from the support from CCM, the communications and everybody, just everybody as a whole. And I wanted to thank you because this is special to me. This is important to me, serious to me. I'm passionate about it because we don't need to have 10,000 more kids be disconnected next year. It sucks. It's bad. This is Connecticut. We can make it change. So I'll leave it at that. Oh, and to the young people. Carlos, all y'all that are staying here, Raina, everybody that gave their input, we thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. If I miss your name, Erica, everybody, please, don't act shy. Just say, because the names is kind of hard, but thank you to the young people. Marissa, thank you to the young people. That was awesome. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes.